The scent of leather and whiskey hung heavy in the auction house as Talon Running Bear pushed through the ornate double doors. Conversation halted, eyes turned. The elite canine breeders, with their tailored suits and polished shoes, regarded him with unconcealed disdain. His weathered buckskin jacket and silver-streaked black hair, bound in a traditional braid, marked him as an outsider, a stranger among the privileged who traded living creatures like commodities. Talon paid them no mind. His dark eyes, sharp as an eagle's, fixed solely on the German shepherd sitting in quiet dignity within the holding area. Even from this distance, he recognized the distinctive markings of his bloodline, the precise angle of the ears, the intelligent eyes that held generations of loyalty and courage. The dog's ribs showed beneath its dull coat, evidence of neglect that ignited a slow-burning anger in his chest. "Sir, this event is invitation only." A security guard stepped into his path, hand raised. Behind him, Marcus Blackwood approached, his expensive suit and carefully cultivated smile a mask for the predator beneath. "He's not on the approved bidder list," Marcus announced loudly, making a spectacle. "Running Bear, you must be lost. The reservation is 50 miles east." The room fell silent, watching, waiting. The shepherd in the holding area stood alert now, eyes locked on Talon, as if recognizing something primal that transcended time and separation. The scent of home. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Talon Running Bear had not always been the weathered man who entered the auction house that day. For 3 generations, the Running Bear family had raised and trained German shepherds on their land at the edge of the Standing Rock Reservation. His grandfather had started with just 2 dogs, building a reputation that eventually reached military commanders and police departments across the country. The Running Bear bloodline became legendary. Dogs with exceptional intelligence, unwavering loyalty, and an almost supernatural intuition about human needs. Talon had inherited both the gift and the responsibility, expanding the business while maintaining the sacred connection to the animals that was central to Lakota tradition. Dogs walk between worlds, his father had taught him. They understand both animal spirits and human hearts. This philosophy infused his training methods, emphasizing respect and partnership rather than dominance and submission. His son, Wachiwi, had followed his footsteps, joining the military as a dog handler. Pride had filled Talon's heart when his son was paired with Maka, the finest shepherd Talon had ever bred. "We will make you proud, father," Wachiwi had promised before deployment. 3 months later, both Wachiwi and Maka returned in flag-draped coffins, victims of faulty intelligence that led their unit into an ambush. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning. Talon remembered the weight of the paper in his hands, how the words blurred before his eyes. His wife, Catherine Two Rivers, had tried to help him through the grief, but his spirit had retreated into darkness. He stopped training, stopped eating, stopped living. By the time he emerged from his profound mourning, Catherine had gone, leaving only a note, "I cannot watch you disappear too." It was during this vulnerable period that Marcus Blackwood made his move. The young man had apprenticed under Talon for 5 years, learning his techniques, gaining his trust through a combination of forged signatures, legal manipulation, and exploiting Talon's distracted state. Marcus acquired rights to the Running Bear name, the breeding stock, and the client lists. By the time Talon gathered the strength to fight back, the courts had sided with the paperwork, not with tradition or truth. Now, at 68, Talon lived alone in a small cabin on what remained of his land, with only memories and the distant howl of coyotes to keep him company. The envelope arrived 3 weeks ago, delivered by Frank Eagle Feather himself, rather than left in the rusted mailbox at the end of Talon's dirt driveway. Frank, a Vietnam veteran turned postal worker, had known Talon since childhood. His weathered face had shown concern as he handed over the glossy invitation. "You might want to take a look at this, old friend," Frank had said, standing on the porch as autumn leaves danced around his boots. "Return address is Blackwood Kennels," sitting in his rocking chair. Talon had torn open the envelope with calloused fingers. The invitation was embossed with gold lettering announcing an exclusive purebred canine auction hosted by Blackwood Kennels. His breath had caught when he saw the photograph, a German shepherd with the unmistakable features of his bloodline. The listing described the dog as the last descendant of the legendary Running Bear line, perfect for breeding or service work. "A son of a bitch," Talon had muttered, his hand tightening on the paper. "That's Maka's grandson." Frank had leaned against the porch railing, shaking his head. "You thinking about going?" Talon hadn't answered, but the fire in his eyes spoke volumes. That night, he'd pulled a small metal box from beneath the floorboards of his bedroom, his life savings from leasing part of his land to the Nature Conservancy. For 15 years, he'd been saving that money, though for what purpose, he hadn't known until that moment. The next morning, he'd driven his pickup to the reservation bank, emerging with a cashier's check that represented everything he had. On the drive home, he passed the sprawling property that had once been the Running Bear Training Center, now transformed into Blackwood's sleek corporate operation with electric fences and security cameras. "He's baiting you," Sarah Morningstar had warned when Talon showed her the invitation, as tribal elder and lifelong friend. She knew him better than most. "Marcus always resented that you wouldn't teach him the traditional ways. He took your methods but never understood the spirit behind them." "I know," Talon had acknowledged, studying the photo of the shepherd. "But that dog is suffering. Look at its eyes. Sarah, that's not just a dog. That's my son's legacy." Sarah had squeezed his hand, her ancient fingers still strong. "Then do what you must, but be prepared. Marcus is a spider who weaves complicated webs." Now, standing in the auction house with hostile eyes upon him, Talon understood the trap more clearly. This wasn't just about a dog. This was Marcus's attempt to complete what he'd started 15 years ago, to strip Talon of everything, including his dignity. But Marcus had miscalculated. He thought Talon was coming for a dog. In truth, Talon was coming for justice, for memory, for the sacred bond that connected him to his son across the boundary between worlds. The shepherd in the holding area whined softly, ears pricked forward in recognition, and Talon knew with bone-deep certainty that he would not leave without that dog, regardless of the cost. The confrontation in Sheriff Whitecloud's office had left Talon shaken to his core. Marcus's casual admission, souvenirs, echoed in his mind as he drove home in silence. Maka, a steady presence beside him. The sheriff had physically restrained him after that inflammatory word, his strong hands the only thing that prevented Talon from lunging across the desk. Catherine had guided him out, her touch a tether to reason when rage threatened to consume him. Now, as darkness fell across the reservation, Talon sat in his truck outside his cabin, unable to move. What kind of man kept another's tragedy as a trophy? The dog tags of his fallen son, sacred objects that should have been returned with Wachiwi's body, had instead been locked away in Marcus Blackwood's safe like collector's items. "Come on, boy," he finally said, his voice hollow in the stillness. "Let's go inside." The cabin was cold and dark, the fire long dead in the hearth. Talon moved mechanically through the familiar tasks, kindling the fire, filling Maka's water bowl, heating leftover stew on the old stove. The German shepherd explored his new surroundings cautiously, sniffing at corners, becoming acquainted with this place that would now be home. When the dog reached a closed door at the end of the narrow hallway, he stopped, whining softly. Talon froze. That door had remained shut for 15 years. Wachiwi's bedroom, preserved exactly as he'd left it before deployment. Not once had Talon found the strength to enter. Maka pawed at the door, whining more insistently now. Something in the dog's behavior broke through Talon's numbness. With trembling hands, he reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly, as if expecting resistance from more than just hinges stiff with disuse. The smell hit him first, musty from years of closed air, but underneath, impossibly, the faint scent of his son, sage and pine, and that particular laundry soap Wachiwi had preferred. The room was a time capsule, military recruitment posters on the walls, a dream catcher hanging from the ceiling, shelves lined with trophies from dog competitions, photographs of Wachiwi with his shepherd. Maka entered slowly, his nose working overtime, taking in the sense of a place and person he couldn't possibly know but somehow recognized. He moved to the bed and then looked back at Talon, as if asking permission. When Talon nodded, the dog jumped up and circled 3 times before settling on the faded quilt, his chin resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving Talon. "He would have liked you," Talon said, his voice breaking. He sank to his knees beside the bed, finally allowing the tears he'd held back for 15 years to flow freely. "You remind me of him, dignified, even when hurt." On the bedside table sat a leather-bound journal. Talon had never touched it, respecting his son's privacy, even in death. But now, with accusations about Wachiwi's final mission hanging in the air, he reached for it with shaking hands. The first few entries were mundane training notes, observations about his unit, complaints about the desert heat, then, dated 2 weeks before the ambush. "Something's not right about this intel. Captain seems uncertain, but orders are orders. Told Marcus about my concerns during our call yesterday. He said not to worry, that these missions always sound worse than they are. Still, I've got a bad feeling. Maka senses it too. He's been restless since the briefing." Talon's blood turned to ice. The journal fell from his numb fingers. Wachiwi had spoken to Marcus before the mission had expressed concerns that Marcus had dismissed. A knock at the door pulled him from his shocked silence. Maka lifted his head, but didn't growl, which meant the visitor wasn't a threat. Wiping his face, Talon moved through the cabin on unsteady legs and opened the door to find Catherine standing there, her eyes red-rimmed from her own tears. "I couldn't let you be alone tonight," she said simply. "Not after what happened." Behind her stood a young woman, perhaps 25, with Catherine's cheekbones and Talon's eyes. "This is Luna," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "Our daughter, the one I never told you about." Dawn broke over the reservation as Talon's truck rumbled down the gravel path to Dr. Catherine Two Rivers Veterinary Clinic. The modest single-story building sat on the outskirts of town, its weathered sign featuring silhouettes of animals both domestic and wild. Maka sat alert in the passenger seat, his amber eyes taking in the surroundings, his body still tense from years of neglect. Occasionally, he would turn to look at Talon, as if ensuring the old man was still there, that this wasn't some cruel dream from which he'd awakened back in a sterile kennel. "We're almost there, boy," Talon murmured, one hand briefly leaving the steering wheel to rest on the dog's head. She's the best vet in 3 counties. She'll help get you strong again. What Talon didn't say was how his heart hammered at the thought of seeing Catherine again after 15 years. The last time they'd stood face to face, her eyes had been hollow with grief, her bags packed by the door. "I can't breathe here anymore," she'd said. "Everything reminds me of him." The memory still cut like a knife. The clinic parking lot was empty when they arrived. Catherine had agreed to see them before official hours, a small mercy that would spare them both the audience of clients and staff. Talon helped Maka down from the truck, noting how the dog's hip bones protruded beneath his dull coat, how his movements, though dignified, betrayed years of confinement. The door opened before they reached it. Catherine. 2 rivers stood framed in the entrance, her black hair now streaked with silver, her copper skin lined with 15 years of living he knew nothing about. She wore a white lab coat over jeans and a turquoise blouse, a stethoscope draped around her neck. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of their shared past hanging in the cool morning air. "Talon," she said finally, her voice softer than he remembered. Her eyes moved to the shepherd. "And this must be the auction dog. His name is Maka," Talon replied. Catherine's eyebrow raised slightly at the name, the same as their son's dog, but she said nothing, stepping aside to let them enter. Inside the examination room, Catherine conducted a thorough assessment, her professional demeanor a shield between them. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency over Maka's body, checking teeth, eyes, joints, while Talon stood awkwardly by the wall, feeling every one of his 68 years. "He's approximately 20 pounds underweight," Catherine noted, making entries on her tablet. "Shows signs of stress and nutritional deficiency. His teeth need cleaning, and there's some muscle atrophy, likely from confinement without adequate exercise." She looked up, meeting Talon's eyes. "The underlying dog is exceptional, though, with proper care, he'll recover completely." "How long?" Talon asked, his voice rougher than he intended. "Physical recovery, 2 months. The psychological healing depends on you." She hesitated, then added more softly, "He shows signs of what we call kennel syndrome, minimal socialization, limited enrichment, common in commercial operations." The clinical description of Maka's neglect tightened something in Talon's chest. "Marcus knows better. I taught him better. Knowing and caring are different things," Catherine observed, preparing a series of vaccines. As she administered them, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at it, frowning. "Excuse me for a moment." Left alone with Maka, Talon stroked the dog's head, murmuring in Lakota, ancient words of comfort his grandfather had taught him. The shepherd leaned into his touch, a tremor running through his body. When Catherine returned, her expression had changed. "Have you checked the news this morning?" she asked, handing him her tablet. The headline made his breath catch. "Blackwood Kennels under investigation, State Agriculture Department raids breeding facility." The accompanying photo showed officials in windbreakers leading dogs from a large compound, the very facility Talon had passed countless times, each citing a reminder of what he'd lost. He quickly scanned the article. In a pre-dawn operation, state agriculture officials, accompanied by animal welfare experts, executed a search warrant at Blackwood Kennels' main breeding facility. Sources indicate the raid follows months of anonymous complaints regarding animal treatment and breeding practices. Over 60 dogs were removed from the premises for evaluation. Owner Marcus Blackwood could not be reached for comment. Talon looked up, meeting Catherine's gaze. This isn't a coincidence. No, she agreed. The timing is too perfect. Someone triggered this investigation deliberately. Before Talon could respond, the clinic door opened, and Sheriff John White Cloud walked in, still in uniform, his expression grim but satisfied. "Thought I might find you here," he said to Talon. "Figured you'd want to know what's happening." "The raid on Blackwood's facility?" Talon asked. White Cloud nodded. "Been in the works for months. State investigators built their case quietly, waited until they had enough for multiple charges: animal cruelty, fraudulent registration papers, tax evasion." He paused, his dark eyes serious. "But there's more. Talon, they found documents in Blackwood's office, records dating back to when he acquired your operation. The signatures. They don't match yours. They're forged." The revelation landed like a physical blow. Talon had always known Marcus's acquisition had been manipulative, had taken advantage of his grief, but outright fraud. That was something else entirely. "There's one more thing," the sheriff continued, his voice lowering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside were military dog tags, the metal still gleaming despite the years. "These belong to your son. They were in Blackwood's safe." The sheriff's office buzzed with unusual activity as Talon arrived the following morning. 3 news vans were parked outside. Reporters standing in the cold with microphones and cameras. Word had spread quickly about the raid on Blackwood kennels, turning a local dispute into regional news. Talon slipped in through the side entrance, Maka at his heel. The dog moved cautiously through the unfamiliar environment, staying close to Talon's leg as they navigated the narrow hallway to Sheriff White Cloud's office. Inside, Catherine was already waiting, her professional composure intact, though her fingers betrayed her tension. Tapping rhythmically against the arm of her chair, Sheriff White Cloud sat behind his desk. Files spread before him, his lined face grave. "Glad you could make it," White Cloud said, gesturing to an empty chair. "The district attorney will be joining us shortly. There are some developments you need to hear." Before Talon could respond, the door opened behind him. The voice that filled the room sent ice through his veins. "This is harassment. Plain and simple," Marcus Blackwood announced, striding in with a thin man in an expensive suit. Clearly his attorney. Marcus stopped short when he saw Talon, his carefully constructed outrage faltering for a moment. "What's he doing here?" Marcus demanded. "And that's my dog. That dog was legally purchased at your auction," Sheriff White Cloud interrupted, "as verified by the auction house and your own staff. A transaction I'm contesting on grounds of suspected fraud," Marcus countered. Regaining his composure, his eyes swept over Talon with contempt. "No reservation elder suddenly produces $200,000 in cash without something illegal going on." Talon remained silent, one hand resting on Maka's head. The shepherd's body had tensed at Marcus's entrance, a low growl building in his throat. "The only fraud here," Catherine said, rising from her chair, "is what you've been perpetrating for 15 years. Marcus." Marcus turned to her, his smile cold. "Doctor, 2 Rivers, still bitter about our professional disagreements." "I see. Tell me, how's the reservation clinic, still treating mangy strays while I supply dogs to the governor's mansion?" "Enough," Sheriff White Cloud said sharply. "We're not here to trade insults." He nodded toward the door as a woman in a crisp pantsuit entered, carrying a leather portfolio. "This is District Attorney Lisa Hawkwing. She's handling the state's case against Blackwood Kennels." The DA nodded briskly, taking a seat and opening her portfolio. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to be direct. We have evidence of systematic animal abuse, tax evasion, and document fraud dating back 15 years. She removed several photographs, laying them on the desk. These dogs were removed from your facility yesterday. Their condition speaks for itself. The images showed German shepherds in various states of neglect, ribs showing fur matted, confined to spaces too small for their size. Talon's jaw tightened as he recognized the distinctive markings of his bloodline in each one. Selective photography. Marcus's attorney interjected. My client runs a state-of-the-art facility that passes all inspections. Inspections your client falsified. The DA countered, producing more documents. We have testimony from your former business partner, Joshua Swift Fox, who has turned state's evidence in exchange for immunity. Marcus's face drained of color. Josh wouldn't. He already has, Sheriff White Cloud said flatly. He provided us with quite an education about your operation, including your special side business supplying dogs to military contractors for experimental training programs. At this, Talon's head snapped up. What kind of experiments? The room fell silent. Catherine's hand moved to Talon's shoulder, a gesture of support that spoke of their shared history, despite the years of separation. Mr. Swift Fox's testimony suggests Mr. Blackwood has been selling dogs to private military contractors who use unconventional training methods. The DA explained carefully, methods that would not pass standard animal welfare protocols. And did Swift Fox happen to mention? Talon asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Whether Marcus had similar arrangements 15 years ago when my son was deployed? The implication hung in the air like smoke. Marcus's face contorted with a mixture of fury and fear. You're delusional, old man, he spat. Your son died because he was careless. It had nothing to do with me. Talon rose slowly from his chair, his weathered frame suddenly imposing. Maka stood with him, alert and protective. My son's dog tags were in your safe. Marcus, he said, each word precise and heavy. Tell me why. It was then that Marcus made his fatal mistake. His lips curled into a smirk, a flash of cruel triumph in his eyes. Souvenirs, he said softly. Everyone needs souvenirs. The drive back to his cabin was a blur for Talon. Sheriff White Cloud had physically restrained him after Marcus's callous remark. Preventing what might have been an assault charge, Catherine had guided him out, her hand steady on his arm despite the trembling fury she must have felt herself. Marcus had been taken into custody not just for his confession about the dog tags, but for the mountain of evidence that had been building against him for months. Now, as twilight descended on the reservation, Talon sat in his truck outside his small cabin. Unable to move, Maka waited patiently beside him. The shepherd's presence a silent anchor in the storm of emotions threatening to pull Talon under. Souvenirs. The word echoed in his mind. Grotesque and monstrous. What kind of man kept another man's tragedy as a trophy? Come on, boy, Talon finally said, his voice hollow. Let's go inside. The cabin was cold, the fire long dead in the hearth. Talon moved mechanically, lighting the kindling, filling Maka's water bowl, going through motions that required no thought. The dog explored the small space cautiously, sniffing at corners, becoming acquainted with his new home. When he reached a closed door at the end of the narrow hallway, he stopped, whining softly. Talon froze. That door had remained shut for 15 years. Wachiwi's room, preserved exactly as he'd left it before deployment. Not once had Talon found the strength to enter. Maka pawed at the door, whining more insistently. Something in the dog's behavior broke through Talon's numbness. With trembling hands, he reached for the doorknob, turning it slowly, as if expecting resistance from more than just hinges stiff with disuse. The smell hit him first, musty from years of closed air. But underneath, impossibly, the faint scent of his son, sage and pine, and that particular laundry soap Wachiwi had preferred. The room was a time capsule military recruitment posters on the walls, a dream catcher hanging from the ceiling, shelves lined with trophies from dog competitions. Photographs of Wachiwi with his shepherd, Maka, entered slowly, his nose working overtime, taking in the sense of a place and person he couldn't possibly know but somehow recognized. He moved to the bed and then looked back at Talon, as if asking permission. When Talon nodded, the dog jumped up and circled 3 times before settling on the faded quilt, his chin resting on his paws, his eyes never leaving Talon. "He would have liked you," Talon said, his voice breaking. He sank to his knees beside the bed, finally allowing the tears he'd held back for 15 years to flow freely. "You remind me of him," dignified even when hurt. On the bedside table sat a leather-bound journal. Talon had never touched it, respecting his son's privacy even in death. But now, with accusations and implications about Wachiwi's final mission hanging in the air, he reached for it with shaking hands. The first few entries were mundane training notes, observations about his unit, complaints about the desert heat. Then, dated 2 weeks before the ambush, "Something's not right about this intel. Captain seems uncertain. But orders are orders. Told Marcus about my concerns during our call yesterday. He said not to worry, that these missions always sound worse than they are. Still, I've got a bad feeling. Maka senses it too. He's been restless since the briefing." Talon's blood turned to ice. The journal fell from his numb fingers. Wachiwi had spoken to Marcus before the mission had expressed concerns that Marcus had dismissed. A knock at the door pulled him from his shocked silence. Maka lifted his head, but didn't growl, which meant the visitor wasn't a threat, wiping his face. Talon moved through the cabin on unsteady legs and opened the door to find Catherine standing there, her eyes red-rimmed from her own tears. "I couldn't let you be alone tonight," she said simply. "Not after what happened." Behind her stood a young woman, perhaps 25, with Catherine's cheekbones and Talon's eyes. "This is Luna," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "Our daughter, the one I never told you about." Time seemed to stand still in the doorway of the small cabin. Talon stared at the young woman before him, finding his own features reflected back, the high cheekbones, the determined set of the jaw, the dark eyes that missed nothing. Luna. 2 Rivers. Running Bear stood straight-backed and nervous, her hands clasped before her, waiting for a reaction, any reaction, from the father she'd never met. "You have a daughter," Talon said finally, the words barely audible. Not a question, but a statement he was trying to absorb. "I was 2 months pregnant when I left," Catherine explained, her voice unsteady. "I couldn't. After Wachiwi died, I couldn't bear to stay. But I couldn't bring myself to tell you either. I thought it would only add to your pain, knowing you had another child to worry about." Luna stepped forward. "I've wanted to meet you my whole life," she said simply. "Mom told me everything about you, about the Running Bear legacy, about my brother." Talon stood frozen, overwhelmed by too many revelations in too short a time. From behind him came the soft click of claws on wooden floorboards as Maka approached. Curious about the newcomers, the shepherd moved to Luna's side, sniffing her hand, then looking back at Talon as if confirming her identity. "He knows your family," Talon said, finding his voice at last. "The dogs always know." Something in the simple statement broke the tension. Luna knelt to greet the dog properly, and Talon stepped back, wordlessly inviting them inside, as Catherine closed the door behind them. The small cabin that had been a place of solitary mourning for 15 years suddenly felt like something else. Not yet a home, but no longer a shrine. They settled awkwardly in the living room, cups of strong coffee warming their hands against the chill of revelations and long-buried truths. "I need to tell you something," Luna said after a long silence, "about why I'm here now, why everything is happening at once." Talon looked up, noting for the first time the determined set of her jaw, his own jaw. "I'm an investigator with the tribal legal office," she continued. "4 years ago, I started looking into Blackwood kennels on my own time. I knew what he'd done to you, to our family. I needed to understand." "You built the case against Marcus," Catherine added. "Tell him." "Luna." Luna nodded, reaching into her bag to produce a thick folder. "I found irregularities in his business practices, evidence of tax fraud, animal mistreatment. But I also found this." She handed Talon a yellowed document. "It's an email from Marcus to a private military contractor dated 3 days before Wachiwi's final mission." Talon read it slowly, each word a knife. The email detailed the route Wachiwi's unit would take. Information classified at the time. Information Marcus should never have had access to. "He sold information," Talon said, the paper shaking in his hands. "To whom?" "To people who wanted American operations disrupted." Luna answered quietly. "The FBI is handling that part of the investigation now, but yes, he betrayed Wachiwi, whether he knew exactly what would happen." She trailed off. "He knew," Talon said with certainty. "He wanted the bloodline, the business. Wachiwi was going to take over when he returned. Marcus knew that." The weight of the betrayal settled over the room like a shroud. Maka, sensing the tension, moved to Talon's side, pressing against his leg in silent support. "There's more," Luna said gently. "The DNA tests on the dogs rescued from Marcus's facility. They confirmed what we suspected. They're all from your bloodline. Many direct descendants of Maka's original line. The American Kennel Club has agreed to work with us on reconstructing the pedigrees. With the fraud evidence and your historical records, they'll establish a foundation registry for the rebuilt Running Bear line." For the first time since they'd arrived, something like hope flickered in Talon's eyes. "The dogs can come home," he said softly. "All of them." On. 6 months passed, seasons turning from bitter winter to hopeful spring across the reservation. The land awoke from its frozen slumber, and with it, new life stirred at what locals now called the Running Bear Healing Center, where once a small, lonely cabin had stood. Now a modest complex spread across 5 acres, a training yard enclosed by a cedar fence, a renovated barn housing climate-controlled kennels, and a circular gathering space for community events. Talon stood on the porch of the main building, watching as Luna led a group of teenagers through basic handling exercises with 3 young German shepherds. The dogs moved with the distinctive grace of the Running Bear bloodline, alert and responsive. while the young handlers, most referred by the tribal youth court, followed Luna's instructions with surprising focus. "They're getting better every day," Catherine said, joining him on the porch. In the months since their reunion, she had relocated her veterinary practice to the center, overseeing the rehabilitation of the dogs rescued from Blackwood kennels. The distance between them had gradually diminished, 15 years of separation giving way to cautious reconnection. "The kids or the dogs?" Talon asked, a rare smile warming his weathered face. "Both," she replied, sliding her hand into his. "Sheriff White Cloud called this morning. Marcus's sentencing is next week. 5 years federal time for the fraud and tax evasion, plus state charges for animal cruelty. The investigation into his connections with the military contractors is ongoing." Talon nodded, his expression solemn but unburdened by the rage that had once consumed him. Justice was being served, though nothing could bring back their son. What mattered now was building something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. "The tribal council approved our grant proposal," he said after a moment. "Full funding for the veterans program starting next month." The program had been Luna's idea, combining traditional Lakota healing ceremonies with dog-assisted therapy for Native veterans suffering from PTSD. Already, 4 former soldiers had signed up, drawn by the center's growing reputation as a place where broken spirits, both human and canine, could find restoration. Across the yard, Frank Eagle Feather's truck pulled up, dust billowing behind it. The old postman had become a regular volunteer, his way with troubled youth rivaled only by his knack for construction. The training facility's elegant simplicity bore the marks of his craftsmanship. As Frank approached, Macaw trotted from the kennels to greet him. The dog's transformation was remarkable. His coat now gleamed with health. Muscle had replaced gauntness, and his eyes shone with the confident alertness that had made the Running Bear bloodline legendary. Behind him followed 3 puppies, tumbling over each other in their excitement. "The council members are on their way," Frank announced, reaching down to ruffle Macaw's ears. "Better get everything ready for the ceremony." By midday, the center hummed with activity. Tribal elders in ceremonial attire, community members bearing traditional foods, local law enforcement including Sheriff White Cloud, and families of the youth in the program gathered around the central fire pit. The ceremony was a blend of dedication, blessing, and celebration, marking the official opening of a place that had already begun its healing work. As smoke from sacred herbs rose into the clear spring air, Talon stood with Catherine on one side and Luna on the other, Macaw seated faithfully at his feet, Sarah Morningstar, her ancient face creased with wisdom, approached with an eagle feather in her gnarled hands. "From great pain comes great purpose," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet gathering. "The Running Bear bloodline continues, not just in these dogs, but in the hearts you heal, the traditions you honor, the family you have rebuilt." She placed the feather in Talon's hands. He accepted it with a small nod, words unnecessary between old friends who had witnessed each other's deepest sorrows and unexpected joys. As the ceremony continued around them, Talon looked toward the small memorial garden at the edge of the property where Wachiwi's spirit was honored daily. For the first time in 15 years, the sight brought not just grief, but gratitude for the son whose legacy had found new purpose, for the daughter who had helped reclaim that legacy, and for the dogs who had brought them all home. When life has weathered you like an old barn still standing but bearing the marks of every storm, remember that your value isn't measured by what you've lost, but by what you still have to give. Like Talon Running Bear, many of us carry invisible wounds, children gone too soon, relationships shattered by grief, work and purpose stolen through circumstances beyond our control. We know what it means to stand in auction houses of life where younger, more polished people seem to hold all the cards, but our weathered hands contain wisdom they cannot fathom. Our bloodlines, the values, skills, and traditions we've cultivated over decades remain powerful beyond measure, even when others dismiss them. It's never too late to reclaim what rightfully belongs to your spirit, to find purpose in pain, to discover family you never knew existed. The most profound healing often comes through helping others traverse the valleys we've already crossed. Your greatest contributions may lie not in your past accomplishments, but in what you build from the ashes of loss. The dogs of your life, those loyal companions who recognize your true worth when others see only your weathered exterior, are waiting to come home. So are you. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.